doesn't take a risk, can't take a risk. And so potential prosperity is stillborn. Now that's a crisis. And in the context of those real crises, the Senate created the Senate Select Committee on Florida's economy and named me as the chairman. Talk about leaving the room at the wrong time. President Atwater, our presiding officer, said when he was sworn in that dealing with the consequences of the economy and trying to have some effect on the economic well-being of our families, our communities, and our businesses was the most important thing the legislature faced in the next 2 years. Now, there are limits. The first thing, and this is probably shocking for you to hear from a politician, the first thing is that government needs to be less arrogant about what it can do and what it should do in the economy. Absolutely less arrogant. And someone asked me, a reporter asked me, well, Don, you know, you're going to be chairman of the Select Committee on Florida's economy. What effect are you going to have? And I said, well, we'll have about the same effect on the international and national recession as the Danish Navy did on the outcome of World War II. Well, then you know, Mr. Speaker, what reporters do. They started digging into what the Danish Navy did in World War II. And I pick up a, you know, somebody hands me a blog, I don't read them, and somebody handed it to me, and it said the Danish Navy actually sunk 3 German boats in World War II before they had to scuttle 32 of their own. Well, let's hope we can sink a few boats, and let's hope we don't have to scuttle any of our own. What can we do? Well, we can't change the course of world economic conditions, or even national. But the first thing that Florida's government can do with respect to the economy is to do no harm. That's right. Do no harm. We have placed, government has placed obstacles in the way of business activity. We've placed barriers on the road to recovery. Now, some of those ideas might have been good ideas, arguably. Somebody was for them at the time we did them. But now our case is new. We have to think anew, as Abraham Lincoln said, and act anew. We have to disenthrall ourselves in order to save ourselves. And so the economic policies that arguably had some effect 4 or 5 or 6 years ago need to be re-examined in light of the economic conditions we have today. You know, 4 or 5 years ago, Mr. Speaker, everybody came to you and said that a huge economic issue in Florida was growth management. Well, now we wish we had some damn growth to manage. But we have policies and laws in place that still exist as if our #1 economic problem was managing growth. And that's why the first legislative product of the Select Committee on Florida's economy was something called the Community Renewal Act. I'll tell you what it does. We're going to the Senate floor immediately, as fast as we can. We've already gone through a rapid-fire process to get it ready for the floor. To eliminate transportation concurrency where 75% of the people of Florida live. Because we had rules that required that the last guy in doing some kind of development, whatever it was going to have to pick up the tab for all the transportation costs of all the trips. And it had not just a cooling effect, it had an Arctic effect on development. And that's in part what those who wanted the transportation concurrency requirement wanted to have happen. Well, now we're at a place where we would really like to have some business activity. We'd really like to have a few shovels turning. Now, we're not going to get a bunch of residential development as a consequence of this, but we're going to get some commercial development that's been held up because of transportation concurrency. So the Community Renewal Act eliminates transportation concurrency in Pensacola and in Gulf Breeze and in Fort Walton Beach and in Panama City and in Crestview and in cities and counties across the state of Florida where we have a population density so that we can encourage urban infill and discourage suburban and rural sprawl. The other thing that this legislation does is to eliminate development of regional impact mandates from the State Department of Community Affairs. DRIs are going to be gone. By golly, I wish the whole Department of Community Affairs would be gone, but DRIs are going to be gone. And the other thing is that we're going to make it easier to get rid of impact fees. Now, impact fees are interesting. Impact fees are debatable. when I was the superintendent of schools, I was the only superintendent in the state who walked door to door in the Capitol against impact fees. Because if I want to tax you, I ought to look you in the eye and say, this is what the tax is for, and it's me taxing you. As opposed to me taxing you, and then you having to pass a tax along to him. That's stealth taxation, and that's why I oppose impact fees as a default position for raising taxes. So that's what the Community Renewal Act does. It's a first step, the first of several, probably the first of a dozen legislative packages coming out of the Select Committee. Now, what has that got to do with you and Pensacola and why we're here today? Well, I'll tell you. One of the entities that testified in favor of our legislation was Sacred Heart Hospital. And the reason why is because they got the financing to build that new children's hospital. They've got a site, they've got plans, they've got the market need, but the cost of transportation concurrency, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of extra dollars imposed by the state of Florida, was the stopper to halt plans for a multi-state children's hospital that would improve health care in Northwest Florida, would improve health care in several states, and bring 2,000 jobs to the local economy. Transportation concurrency stopped it, and when we pass that bill, the last barrier will be eliminated, and Sacred Heart Hospital can move forward with a regional children's hospital and create 2,000 jobs in Pensacola. Is that a pretty good idea? You for that? Good. A second job that President Atwater has given the Select Committee is to find, identify, and eliminate redundant, overlapping, non-essential regulatory activities. And believe me, there's plenty of those. Now, you can get lost in that okey-finokie. But I can tell you, we had, Lindsay will tell you, my legislative aide who's here today can tell you, we had folks contact our district office and say, you know, we've moved here from another state, and we're licensed beauticians. We've been offered jobs. We're ready to go to work to earn a salary. We've got our occupational license. Everything's sent locally. But we can't get through the Department of Business and Professional Regulation in Tallahassee. So I went down there with Chuck Drago, the Secretary, spent part of a day, and I found out, and Secretary Drago acknowledged it, that to be a beautician in the state of Florida, after you've satisfied all the educational requirements, after you've got your local occupational license, after you've made the DEP happy about the chemicals you're going to use, after all that's done, your license application has to pass through 27 different sets of hands inside the DBPR building in Tallahassee. It takes months to get somebody who's got a job to be able to work and earn a living. Now that's wrong. Now you might think that's a homely example, just a small thing. But that's the kind of stuff I think we need to stop if we're going to be serious about economic growth and development in the state of Florida. Now, on a little more macro level, you know, everybody in this room who's ever signed the front side of a paycheck can tell a story about how it was that when you tried to open a business or run a business, you have multiple agencies show up and ask you the same questions about getting into business or staying into business or satisfying permitting requirements or licensure requirements. If you own a convenience store, the Department of Agriculture comes and looks at the gas pump above the ground. DEP looks at the same gas pump below the ground. The Department of Health comes in and looks at your dairy case. DBPR comes in through one of their bureaus and looks at the beer you sell. The Department of Revenue is checking the cash box. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So, one of the things that the Select Committee will be recommending to the legislature is that the Secretaries of Health and DEP and DCA and all the other alphabets have to develop a consolidated application process. So you answer the same questions once, not 52 times. Let the departments share the information with each other. A consolidated permitting process, consolidated inspection processes. You know, it's one thing to have 5 guys in there with 5 different clip